A vicious murder case happened in the neighborhood where I live. The property management went to 1302 Wang Guoqiang's home to read the meter and found that the lights were on. No one opened the door when they knocked. No one answered the phone call, but the ringtone came from inside the house. Wang Guoqiang's wife died of cancer a few years ago. He has no children and lives alone after retirement. The building management was worried that something might happen to him, so they called the police. The police opened the door and found that the lights and heating were on, and the mobile phone was charging in the living room. Wang Guoqiang's throat was cut on the bed, and blood was all over the floor. He died miserably. The police investigated in the neighborhood, and two policemen knocked on my door. The young policeman had sharp eyes and showed me his ID. I am Deng Quan from the District Criminal Police Brigade. Are you Su Chen? Yes, what can I do for you? Another middle-aged policeman did not look like a criminal policeman. He looked me up and down with a smile and spoke slowly. Routine investigation. I am Chen Shu from the District Criminal Police Brigade. You can just call me Lao Chen. Is it convenient for us to come in and sit down? I hesitated a little and stepped back from the door. Then please come in, keep your voice down, my wife is sleeping in the back room. Deng Quan sat down after entering the house and took out a notebook and pen to take notes. Chen Shu was not in a hurry to sit down after entering the house. He put his hands behind his back and looked around my living room. Finally, his eyes stopped on a brand new baby bed. Is the family going to have a baby? I said, yes, my wife is about to give birth. After a few pleasantries, we sat down on the sofa. Deng Quan said, do you know that there was a murder in your building? I nodded. Yes, Wang Guoqiang from 1302 was killed. Have you found any suspicious people recently? I shook my head. Where were you when the case happened? I was stunned. The murder happened. When did it happen? Chen Shuo stared at me. His eyes were bright, as if he could see through people's hearts. You don't know. I shook my head blankly. I only heard from my neighbors that Wang Guoqiang was killed, but I didn't hear when he was killed. Chen Shuo stared at my face and spoke quickly. According to the forensic examination, Wang Guoqiang died between 8 p.m. and 12 p.m. on the 15th. Where were you at that time? Is there anyone who can testify? On the night of the 15th, I lowered my head and thought about it, then raised my head and said, I played cards in the tea house owned by Mr. Ding across the community all night. People who played cards with me can testify. Chen Shuo frowned slightly. Your wife is pregnant, so you didn't stay at home to accompany her. Why did you go to play cards? I smiled awkwardly. My card friends kept urging me, and I couldn't refuse. I reported the names and contact information of Mr. Ding and several card friends in the tea house, and Officer Deng Quan next to me wrote them down one by one. After recording a few questions, Deng Quan left first, but Chen Shuo was not in a hurry to leave. He raised his eyebrows and asked me, I heard that you and Wang Guoqiang had a feud before. I sighed. I knew you were here for this, but that was more than 10 years ago, and there is no feud now. Chen Shuo paused. Well, your wife is about to give birth, and we don't want to bother you anymore. You accompany me to the tea house across the street and go through the alibi process. I hesitated for a moment, nodded, picked up my coat and went out with him. Chen Shuo gave me a cigarette and chatted with me as we walked. He is very good at chatting, and his way of speaking is very different from the police I usually come into contact with. But no matter what we talk about, he can always talk back to the case. The more I talked, the more I felt something was wrong. I stopped and asked, Officer Chen, do you suspect that I killed Wang Guoqiang? Chen Shu shook off the ash from his cigarette and smiled. Don't think too much. I just asked a few people who were familiar with Wang Guoqiang to see if there were any clues. I said seriously, then you found the wrong person. I went to study and work in other places after graduating from high school. I came back 2 years ago after the village was demolished and resettled and I was allocated a house. I have no contact with Wang Guoqiang. He was killed, don't blame me. Chen Shu nodded, was silent for a moment, and pointed to the tea house across the street. You played cards in this tea house on the 15th. Yes, let's go and take a look. Even if Wang Guoqiang's matter has nothing to do with you, you still have to go through the process, okay? My tone was a little helpless. I knew in my heart that he was suspicious of me. When we walked into the tea house, Officer Deng Quan had already checked inside in advance. When he saw us coming in, he reported to Chen Shuo, Captain Chen, I have confirmed with the boss that Su Chen played cards here all night on the 15th. Several card players have verified it by phone and can all testify for him. Chen Shuo did not speak, but was still smiling, with his hands behind his back, walking around the tea house. Tea house owner Ding came up with a smile on his face to pass out cigarettes. Chen Shuo took it and lit it, pointing to a camera above the counter. Can you call up this surveillance for me to see? Okay. I want the night of the 15th. Boss Ding took out his mobile phone, opened the surveillance app and handed it to him. Chen Shuo dragged the progress bar, watched for a while, suddenly stopped, looked up and asked me, Su Chen, you left the card table at 10:49 that night and came back at almost 12 o'clock. Where did you go during this time? I was stunned. Boss Ding spoke first. He pointed at the mobile phone video with a thick Fujian accent. We often get tired of playing cards, so we change people to go to the inner room to rest, and then come out to continue playing. After 10 o'clock, Guoqiang replaced Zizou at the table. Zizou came out after resting and replaced me, you see. At 11:53 in the video, I came out of the inner room and replaced Boss Ding at the table, while Boss Ding walked to the inner room. Chen Shuo nodded. Take me to the inner room to have a look. Officer Deng has just seen it. Boss Ding smiled. Chen Shuo's eyes narrowed. I haven't seen it yet. Boss Ding shrugged helplessly. The inner room is not big, with anti-theft grills on the windows, a single bed, a desk, and a TV hanging on the wall broadcasting the news. At 10:49 on the surveillance camera, I got up from the card table and walked into the small room, and at 11:53 I came out of the small room again. There is only one door in the room, and the windows are equipped with anti-theft nets, so it is impossible for people to go out. Therefore, the only way to enter and exit the tea house hall is through the door. My absence on the night of the 15th is a complete proof. Chen Shu looked around and didn't want to leave. I was getting a little impatient and asked him, Officer Chen, have you finished reading it? Do you believe I am not a suspect this time? Chen Shu saw that I was anxious and smiled and said, We are just doing a routine investigation. Don't mind, Brother Su. Let's go. I finally breathed a sigh of relief and walked out of the tea house. He casually asked again, I heard that your college entrance examination score was good enough to get into a 985 university, but you applied to the police academy. Can you tell me why? My heart skipped a beat and my face changed. You investigated so thoroughly that you even investigated my previous college entrance examination scores. Chen Shuo smiled. For work. Of course, the more detailed the better. I took a puff of cigarette and tried to keep my voice calm. I liked to read detective novels in high school, so I applied for the crime scene investigation major at the police academy. Thinking that I could become a detective after graduation, he observed my expression and asked, Then why did you quit your job as a criminal police officer after graduation? I smiled bitterly and said, Old Chen, you are also a criminal policeman, you know. How can you buy a house, a car, and a wife with that little salary? Chen Shuo also laughed. I asked you so many questions today, please don't mind. I am not afraid of you laughing at me. This case is difficult and I still have no clue. I didn't know how to answer. So I had to say, if there is nothing else, I will leave first. Seeing that I was about to leave, he pulled me back. Brother Su, you are also studying criminal investigation and are familiar with this community. Why don't you help me analyze the clues of this homicide case? I was surprised. I never thought that he would make such a request. I can't do that. I owe you a favor. I will treat you to a meal when the case is solved. I was a little reluctant, but looking at his eyes, I still lowered my head and thought about it, and asked, Have the vehicles and people in and out of the community been checked? 15. We checked all the vehicles and people that entered and left the house all day, and we didn't find any suspicious people. Then you police suspect that it was an acquaintance who committed the crime. Chen Shu frowned slightly. I can't be completely sure, but the murderer must know the password of his front door. Oh. His house has a password lock, and the doors and windows are intact. There is only one possibility. The murderer entered the password to enter the room, cut Wang Guoqiang's throat with the kitchen boning knife, and then left. The things in the house are neatly arranged, no property is lost, and there are no signs of struggle. I nodded slightly, thought for a moment and asked, It looks like a vendetta, and the social background has been checked. He was a bully in the village back then, And he was so domineering that he must have offended many people. Chen Shu shook his head. Wang Guoqiang lives alone and is not in good health. He is usually low-key and rarely interacts with others, as far as we know. He has not had any grudges with anyone recently. Are there any clues such as fingerprints and footprints in the house? There are no suspicious fingerprints and footprints at the scene. They have all been carefully cleaned. The murderer is very familiar with this community and has strong anti-reconnaissance capabilities. At least he has received professional anti-criminal investigation training. After Chen Shu finished speaking, he stared at my eyes tightly, as if he wanted to judge something through my expression. I was a little anxious. Old Chen, why are you looking at me like this? Are you still suspicious of me? I have an alibi. Think about it, my wife is about to give birth. If I really want to kill him, I won't choose this time. Chen Shu was silent for a moment, and said seriously, Zissou, to be honest, you have a motive for murder, conditions, and means. It's just that you have an alibi, but whether your alibi is credible, we will re-verify it. It can't be said that you are completely excluded from suspicion now. Evidence and surveillance are all there, and there is still suspicion. I was anxious, and my eyes were a little panicked, but I quickly calmed down and said in a deep voice, I hope you can solve the case as soon as possible and find the real murderer. If nothing else, I will go back to accompany my wife. He didn't say anything, but just stared at me closely, as if he wanted to find some clues from my eyes. I stopped looking at him, thinking to myself that this policeman seemed harmless, but he was actually not simple. Fortunately, I was well prepared and just deliberately showed a little panic. I lowered my head and crossed the road to the gate of the community. I glanced back and saw that he was still standing there staring at me, as if thinking about something. I felt a chill on my back, knowing that the battle with him was far from over and had just begun. Less than 2 weeks later, the police came to my door again. Suqian, according to the latest evidence we have, you are a major suspect in the murder of Wang Guoqiang. We are summoning you to come back to the police station with us to assist in the investigation. Deng Quan took out a document. This is a search warrant. We are going to search your house now. I was still calm. I took the search warrant and looked at it. I looked up and said, you can search, but I can't go with you. My wife is about to give birth. I have to stay at home to take care of her. Deng Quan's tone was irrefutable. Don't worry about this. We have notified your father-in-law and mother-in-law to take care of your wife. They are on their way. I was a little angry. You actually called my father-in-law and mother-in-law. Why didn't you tell me in advance? Deng Quan scolded. Do we need to report to you what we do? My wife's voice came from the bedroom. Qian, go. She slowly came out of the bedroom holding her belly. What's the big deal? It's not like you are going to be shocked. You go and explain the matter clearly and come back quickly. Anyway, my parents are here, and I'm fine here. Chen Shu glanced at my wife and was slightly surprised by her calmness. When I was taken out of the community, neighbors pointed and talked from afar. I lowered my head and said nothing. I just glanced at the tea house across the street. I saw 2 policemen taking pictures outside the tea house. I looked a little panicked. I turned around and met Chen Shu's sharp eyes, as if he could see through me. After entering the police station, I first recorded my fingerprints, and then I was handcuffed and taken to the interrogation room. On the interrogation table opposite, Chen Shu was sitting in the middle, and next to him were Officer Deng Quan and a recorder. Deng Quan spoke first, with a sharp tone. Suqian, you know our policy. Confess yourself and strive for leniency. I widened my eyes. Officer Deng, what you said is really interesting. Let me confess myself. What can I confess? Deng Quan's face sank. Confess how you killed Wang Guoqiang. I tried to relax my expression and said, I was really amused by you. Just because I had a grudge against him. He is dead now, so I killed him. What evidence do you have? I paused and sneered. It's so easy for you to do criminal investigation like this. Everyone confessed voluntarily. What do you need criminal police to do? Deng Quan's eyes were cold, and he shouted, you don't have to talk and pretend to be innocent. We have solid evidence. You can't escape this case. I leaned back as far as I could, with a harmless smile on my face. You guys are too low level to solve the case, so you blame me? You also want me to confess myself. What a joke. You have also seen the surveillance of the tea house. I have several witnesses. I have an alibi. You can't frame me. He slammed the table and said sternly, Don't pretend. You have also been a criminal policeman. We won't summon you without evidence. You'd better take the initiative. I laughed. And suddenly my face changed. You can interrogate me for a maximum of 24 hours. If you have evidence, bring it out as soon as possible. If you don't have evidence, let me go. Do you want to torture me to extract a confession? He was so angry that he was shaking. And looked at Chen Shu. Chen Shu frowned slightly, stared at me closely, and said in a deep voice, Su Qian, let me tell you, there is a secret door in the skylight of the tea house, and you can climb outside through this secret door. Footprints and fingerprints were found on the skylight and the outer wall, and we are doing a comparison. Before the comparison results come out, we are willing to give you a chance to confess voluntarily. Don't be ungrateful. If the results come out, you will have no chance. I was silent for a while, and whispered, even if I climb out of the skylight as you said, I have to cross the road to enter the community. There are surveillance cameras on the road and at the entrance of the community. How come they didn't find me? Chen Shu saw my eyes flickering, smiled slightly, and looked at me like a cat and mouse. You can avoid the zebra crossing and cross the road from other places to avoid surveillance. As for entering the community, you can just climb over the wall. There is no need to go through the gate. I was silent. Seeing that I bowed my head and kept silent, Chen Shu stood up. Think about it carefully, and tell us when you have thought it through. After they left, I closed my eyes to rest. The winter nights were cold, and the chairs were cold and hard. It was easy to collapse mentally when I was locked in this small dark room without windows. I went over the whole plan in my mind again. Now I only had the last step left. If I completed the last step, I could get out soon. At around 9 o'clock in the evening, Chen Shuo came in, and this time he was alone. He handed me a cigarette and lit it for me. How are you thinking about it? I took a puff of the cigarette and said, what you said are all inferences, not substantive evidence. He smiled. It's okay, it's time to get off work now. Let's chat casually. Anyway, you have nothing to do. I bowed my head and smiled bitterly. What's there to talk about? Your family has a grudge with Wang Guoqiang. What is it? Haven't you investigated it? He sat down on the interrogation table calmly. I want to hear you say it yourself. The statement of the eyewitness is the most direct. I took a deep puff of smoke into my lungs, then gently released it from my mouth and nose, slowly opened my mouth. And my thoughts went back to 16 years ago. It was 1999. I was 13 years old, and my mother Wang Guoqiang was pregnant with her second child for more than 6 months. At that time, everyone was an only child, and a family could only have one child. But my parents always wanted to have more children, so they planned to give me another brother or sister. They discussed and wanted to hide and give birth to the child secretly. Maybe it was the stimulation of nicotine. My speaking speed gradually became faster. It was summer vacation at that time, and I followed my mother to hide from place to place. But not long after, he found me. Chen Shuo interrupted me. Are you talking about him, Wang Guoqiang? I nodded. Yes, I remember that day my father was not at home. My mother and I rented a house at the junction of urban and rural areas. In the middle of the night, the dog outside the house suddenly barked, and when I woke up, the door had been knocked open. I recognized several people who came in, and the leader was Wang Guoqiang from the village office. He shone a flashlight on us and kept cursing my mother. I was a little excited, and my tone was getting faster and faster. My mother originally thought that she had been pregnant for more than 6 months. Wang Guoqiang was also from the same village, and we were all from the same village. My father also earned some money working outside. According to national regulations, we should pay the fine and admit our mistakes. Unexpectedly, Wang Guoqiang ordered the people around him to take my mother to the hospital for induced abortion. He also said that if my mother ran away again, the baby in her belly might not be born, and everyone's quota for this year would be ruined. He is not a state official. What right does he have to do this? At this point, my eyes widened, my face flushed, and I trembled all over. My mother knelt down on the spot and said that she was more than 6 months pregnant and it was dangerous to induce abortion at this time. According to the regulations, we would definitely pay the fine. But Wang Guoqiang took it as a token of authority and ignored my mother's life and death and forced her to go to the hospital for induced abortion. I lifted the hair on my forehead, revealing a scar on my hairline. Look, they pulled my mother. I went forward to fight them, and Wang Guoqiang hit me on the head with a flashlight, and blood was all over my face. I was only 13 years old at that time, and he could be so cruel. Chen Shu looked at the scar on my forehead and sighed. The anger in my chest was ignited at this moment, and I excitedly said to Chen Shu, "Old Chen, tell me, is this kind of person a beast?" Is he? Chen Shu sighed. These things were not uncommon at that time. Under that historical background, the practices of rural staff at all levels are considered inhumane today. Inhumane? I snorted coldly. Do you know what the slogans they posted in the village are? Beat it out, abort it, flow it out, but don't give birth to it. I felt humiliated and tears welled up in my eyes. When I arrived at the hospital, the doctor said that there were risks in inducing abortion for more than 6 months, and family members had to sign for induction. I was too young to sign, and I didn't want to sign. The damn Wang Guoqiang actually signed for my family for his own assessment indicators. As a result, during the induction operation, my mother had a heavy hemorrhage and died on the operating table. One body, 2 lives. Speaking of this, my tears flowed uncontrollably. I followed them to the hospital and secretly called my dad. My dad was so anxious that he rushed over on a motorcycle. He ran through several red lights and was hit by a truck on the way. I hammered the table, then buried my head in it, rubbing my hair with both hands. I regretted very much. I hate myself. If I hadn't made that call, maybe my dad would be fine. I raised my head again, stared into Chen Shu's eyes, and said in a hoarse voice, "I will never forget that day. My mom, my dad, and my unborn brother or sister are all gone." All gone? Chen Shu was silent for a moment and said, "You didn't do anything wrong." That was the tragedy of that era. I clenched my fists. If I hadn't been burned, I might have rushed to him. What tragedy of the era? Wang Guoqiang is a beast who harms the world and the law. Old Chen, tell me, should this kind of person die? Whether he should die or not, I don't have the final say, Chen Shuo said slowly. I heard from your fellow villagers that you bit your index finger and swore in public that when you grow up, you will kill Wang Guoqiang to avenge your parents. I calmed down a little and said, I said that he killed my parents and said that my family was a guerrilla group for overbirth. It's his own fault that he ended up like this. So, I'm very happy that Wang Guoqiang was killed. This kind of person should not die well. My voice was hoarse, revealing great resentment. There was silence in the interrogation room for a moment. Chen Shuo whispered, I sympathize with your family's experience. Both parents died and you became an orphan. This is your misfortune and the misfortune of that era. But no matter what injustice you encounter, you cannot violate the law. As long as you violate the law, no matter what the reason is, you will be punished by the law. He stood up and looked at me. Everyone has hatred in their hearts. If you kill people just to vent your hatred, then the law will become a dead letter. If you confess, I will definitely help you. Believe me. I was silent. Seeing that I still didn't say a word, he said again, think about it carefully. Tomorrow morning is your last chance. I fell asleep at night and dreamed of my parents. I told them not to worry, it would be over soon. The next morning, Chen Shu, Deng Quan and the recorder came in one after another. Chen Shu was in high spirits, his eyes full of confidence and determination. Suqian, what have you thought about? Take the initiative to confess. I will give you a chance to be lenient. I smiled slightly. Don't joke. What is there to confess about something I haven't done? When will you let me go? Chen Shu was stunned. Through the conversation last night, he must have thought that I would take the initiative to confess this morning, but I didn't expect that I would have this attitude. His eyes became complicated when he looked at me. Deng Quan snorted and said, I can't leave today. You are a major suspect. Even if it exceeds 24 hours, we can apply for an extension. I laughed out loud. What you said yesterday was all speculation. I tell you, without evidence it is a false accusation. I can sue you for defamation. Deng Quan's eyes became colder and colder. Suqian, we have compared it. The fingerprints on the skylight of the tea house are yours. The footprints on the outer wall match the pattern on the solace of a pair of rubber shoes in your home. What else do you have to say? I was stunned and looked up and said, what can I say? What does this mean? Are there my fingerprints and footprints at Wang Guoqiang's home? Chen Shu took over the conversation. Then let me tell you what you did on the night of the 15th. I made a gesture to him to go ahead. Chen Shu stood up, put his hands behind his back, and paced while saying, "On the night of the 15th, you played cards in Boss Ding's store at 10:49. When you were playing cards, you lied that you were tired and went into the hut to rest. After entering the house, you used the table to climb up to the small roof shed. Then you opened the skylight and climbed outside, and climbed down the outer wall. There are your fingerprints on the skylight, and your footprints on the outer wall." I remained calm and asked, "Then what?" "You followed the blind spot of the road surveillance, bypassed the zebra crossing, and crossed the road from the blind spot of the surveillance. You also avoided the community surveillance, climbed over the wall to enter the community, and then entered building No. 6 where Wang Guoqiang lived." I snorted and sneered. It turns out that I can fly over the eaves and walls. Chen Shu ignored my sarcasm and continued, I have mastered his password. This is also very simple. When he is not paying attention, secretly install a pinhole camera at his door, record the password, and take the camera away. You enter the password to enter his house, kill him when he is not prepared, and then return to the cabin." He paused, and seeing that I didn't say a word, he continued, "At 11:53, you come out of the cabin again, pretend to wake up, and go back to the table to play cards for Boss Ding. Your poker friends will naturally think that you woke up in the cabin and came out. Am I right?" I applauded the statement, but the handcuffs made a metallic clanging sound. "Old Chen, since you are so good at making excuses, let me ask you a question." Chen Shu looked calm. "You say I said word by word. You said that I stood on the table and climbed up the shed, went to the community to kill Wang Guoqiang, and then returned to the tea house. Then tell me how I climbed up the 3 or 4 meter high skylight from the outer wall and entered the hut after I returned to the tea house." Several policemen were stunned and looked at each other. Obviously, they had not thought about this question carefully. Deng Quan said, "Maybe you used tools such as ladders and tables, and then discarded them after committing the crime." "This is not the point. The point is your fingerprints and footprints," I sneered. "You rely on guesswork to solve the case. You said that I wore rubber-soled shoes to climb the skylight that day, but you can see in the video that I was wearing leather shoes that day. You changed your shoes temporarily. What's strange about that?" Deng Quan said. I laughed out loud. "Ha ha, I have to change my shoes after killing someone. How bizarre. All this is your inference. There are my fingerprints on the shed roof and skylight, and my footprints on the outer wall. What does this prove?" "It can only be said that I climbed up the skylight." "What does it have to do with Wang Guoqiang's murder?" Chen Shu sneered. "It's useless for you to quibble like this." I shook my head. "Quibbling? I tell you, I did climb up the skylight, but that was 2 days ago when Lao Ding's child's balloon floated up, and I climbed up to help him get the balloon." "You can investigate this. You have to let me go after 24 hours if you don't have substantial evidence." Chen Shu stared at my eyes, like an old hunter looking at a beast that was resisting. "Su Qian, I tell you, there is no such thing as a perfect murder. The net of heaven is vast and nothing can escape it. If you did it, there will always be loopholes." I laughed. "If there are loopholes, you can find them. From last night to now, you have been trying to trick me. I tell you, you are still far from being able to break through the psychological defenses of the criminals. Old Chen, what era is this? You still use the trick of fooling the suspect. No wonder you can't solve the case." My words were too much. The muscles on Chen Shu's face were trembling. He has always been very calm, but now he was also angry with me. "Su Qian, if you do this, no one can help you." Several policemen turned pale and walked out of the interrogation room. I knew they would interrogate me again in the afternoon, but I had made preparations. Even if they extended the time for assisting the investigation, I would only stay in the police station for a few more days. Now I just waited for my wife to rescue me at the right time. After lunch, they came to interrogate me again. I didn't say a word and was still unmoved. While the interrogation was in progress, the phone on the table suddenly rang. "A call here at this time must be urgent." Deng Quan picked up the phone, listened to a few words, and suddenly his face changed. "Wait a minute, I'll let Captain Chen listen." He looked at me with a strange expression and handed the phone to Chen Shu. Chen Shu was also a little surprised. He took the phone and frowned more and more as he listened. When he put down the phone, the two of them looked at me together and hurriedly left the interrogation room. More than half an hour later, Chen Shu and Deng Quan returned to the interrogation room. Chen Shu was still able to maintain his demeanor, but Deng Quan was a little disappointed, like an eggplant hit by frost. Chen Shu smiled reluctantly and said, "Su Chen, you can go now. Didn't you say I couldn't leave today?" Deng Quan stared at my eyes, his face uncertain. "You did it on purpose. You obviously still have evidence. Why didn't you take it out earlier, wasting our police force for more than half a month?" I was full of doubt. "What are you talking about? I don't understand." Chen Shu once again stared at my face closely. "Your wife just sent a video to prove your innocence." "My wife? What video? I don't understand." Chen Shu's face was very bad. "There is also surveillance in the back room of the tea house, proving that you were indeed in the back room on the night of the 15th. I was calm in my heart, and pretended to be surprised on the surface. "There is surveillance in the back room." In fact, the surveillance video of the back room was left by my wife, and she was asked to send it after our community's intelligence system was upgraded. The fact that she sent the video at this time shows that my plan has succeeded. The video is a surveillance video of the back room of the tea house, but when the police came to check, the camera in the back room had been removed. The surveillance recorded two videos on the 15th and 16th. The first video was the surveillance video of the 15th. It can be clearly seen that I walked in from the hall at 10:49 that night, then lay on the bed to sleep, got up at 11:50, and walked out of the room again a few minutes later. The TV on the wall in the surveillance video was turned on, playing CCTV1, and the time was consistent with the surveillance video. The second video was on the 16th. Boss Ding's child was playing with balloons in the inner room, and then the balloons flew to the ceiling. I dragged the table and climbed onto the ceiling. My expression at this moment was very surprised. Even the most famous director would admire my acting skills. There is such a thing. How come I don't know? Why would my wife press the surveillance camera in the tea house? Chen Shuo still stared at my eyes, but he seemed to get to know me again. "Your wife said that she hired someone to install the surveillance. You were hanging out in tea houses every day during that period, and she suspected that you were cheating, so she secretly installed the surveillance." I sighed at them. "You see, this woman is so suspicious. Every family has its own problems." Deng Quan was a little annoyed and shouted, "Are you deliberately playing tricks on us?" I widened my eyes. "Don't talk nonsense. Why would I play tricks on you? If I had known earlier, wouldn't I have brought out the evidence earlier? As for asking you to take me to the police station, I am willing to stay in the interrogation room for a night," he said angrily. "You obviously want to direct our attention to the tea house. Why did you do this?" It was indeed my plan to let them focus on the tea house, but how could I admit it at this time? "You are still suspicious of me after all this. Why don't you say that I instructed my wife to kill Wang Guoqiang?" Without any substantial evidence, they quickly let me go. My wife and I returned to the community and passed by the property management center. We saw the property management staff advising the owners to re-download the community's smart app software. I smiled, and the haze in my heart for a long time was swept away. Yes, I killed Wang Guoqiang. From the day I lost all my family members, I was always thinking about how to kill him for revenge. In the first few years, I was just a brave man. I bought a sharp knife and sometimes quietly followed Wang Guoqiang, looking for an opportunity to stab him to death. But after careful planning, I found that it would be difficult to succeed. First of all, Wang Guoqiang was tall and strong, and I was just a teenager. I might not be able to kill him. Secondly, even if I killed him, I would have to pay with my life. My mother told me on her deathbed that I must live well and give our Su family a branch. If I killed him and was shot, then our Su family would be extinct. My parents died to continue their offspring. I would be too sorry for them if I died like this. I lived in a daze for those years until I saw Kigo Higashino's series of novels in the library by chance. Suddenly, I was enlightened. It turns out that revenge does not necessarily require brute force. I can design a perfect murder, which can kill him and keep myself safe. A gentleman's revenge is never too late. My parents left me enough property for my living expenses. I calmed down and began to focus on my studies. My grades continued to improve. I passed the 985 score line in the college entrance examination. To the surprise of my teachers and classmates, I went to the police academy to study crime scene investigation. After graduating from college, I was assigned to the front line with excellent grades and began to accumulate criminal investigation experience. 4 years later, my hometown was demolished and I was allocated a house. I chose to resign and return home. I got married and my wife was pregnant. The Su family would not be extinct. I felt that the time was ripe and I could start to implement my revenge plan. Wang Guoqiang has retired and has no children. His wife died of cancer a few years ago. He lives alone now, rarely interacts with others, and is basically at home at night. If I kill him, no one will find out immediately. His front door is locked with a password. I secretly installed a pinhole camera on the window frame opposite the door and recorded his home password. That night, I sneaked into his house in the middle of the night. He was already asleep. Looking at his gray hair, wrinkles on his face, and saliva at the corners of his mouth, I suddenly realized that the arrogant village tyrant was already an old man in his twilight years. For me, more than 10 years have passed, and many things have changed. The only thing that remains unchanged is the hatred buried deep in my heart. Without any hesitation, I took out a boning knife from his kitchen, covered his mouth, and cut his carotid artery in his horrified eyes. He struggled, making a mumbling sound in his mouth, and blood foam gushed out of his throat. At that moment, the feeling of revenge was very strange, as if the pain that had been suppressed in my heart for a long time was released in an instant. There is pleasure, but also emptiness. The pleasure comes from the success of revenge, and emptiness is a kind of relief from my long-term depression. As for how to deal with the aftermath, I have a detailed plan. Our community is a smart community with fine decoration. The air conditioner has been equipped when the house is delivered. The air conditioner can be remotely operated through the Smart Housekeeper app. I have already obtained Wang Guoqiang's app login password in advance. The password is very simple, the same as his home entry password. After killing him, I logged into his Smart Housekeeper app and set the air conditioner to cooling mode. This will be the most important part of my alibi. Starting from the next day, I went to Mr. Ding's tea house to play cards every day, and the pinhole camera in the tea house was installed at that time. On the day of meter reading, I estimated that the property management might call the police if they couldn't find Wang Guoqiang, so I logged into Wang Guoqiang's Smart Housekeeper app again with my mobile phone and changed the air conditioner to heating mode. When the police entered the room, the whole room was already heated by the air conditioner. I have studied criminal investigation and am familiar with the work process of forensic doctors. The forensic doctor will perform an autopsy based on the temperature and humidity of Wang Guoqiang's home at that time to determine the time of death. The body will decay faster if the heating is on, so the forensic doctor will set the time of death to be shorter than the actual time. I have done a test, and it is about 20 hours later than the actual time. If everything goes as I expected, the police will set the time of death to the evening of the 15th. Later, when Chen Shu came to my house and asked me for my alibi, he said that Wang Guoqiang's time of death was indeed between 8 p.m. and 12 p.m. on the 15th. Chen Shu was right. There is no perfect crime. There will always be clues left. Even the most perfect design has flaws. My flaw is the login operation record of the Smart Housekeeper app. If the police check the app log, they will find that someone logged into Wang Guoqiang's Smart Housekeeper app on the day they found the body. This operation log will remain in the database. I need to destroy the log to ensure my safety. I am a member of the Community Property Committee. In the previous meeting, I guided the Property Committee to replace the Community Smart App system. I repeatedly confirmed with the supplier to ensure that the replacement of the community system will overwrite the previous data and all the previous logs will be cleared. As long as the replacement of the community smart system is completed, I will be safe. So before the community system was replaced, I wanted to direct the police's attention to other places. I left a loophole in the tea house, and on the 16th, I deliberately released the balloon of Boss Ding's child, then climbed to the roof, leaving fingerprints and footprints on the skylight and the outer wall. Everything I did was to make the police focus on the tea house. When the police came to summon me, the community's intelligence system had not been replaced yet. I told my wife that I would come to the police station after the new system was online and provide the video as I had previously explained. When I got home, my wife was still a little nervous. "Qian, is everything okay?" "It's really okay this time," I laughed. She seemed to be trying to calm down her emotions. I knew she was worried about my situation. In fact, I knew she could guess it. After all, she was the one who shared the bed with me. She was a forensic doctor. I asked her so many questions about the disposal of the body. How could she not notice it? I laughed. It's all done. This matter has nothing to do with me anymore. She breathed a sigh of relief and whispered, "The baby is still young. If you really have any accidents, what will we do?" I patted the back of her hand gently. "It's okay. It's all over. Really, you believe me?" She didn't say anything, but just held my hand tightly. I suddenly asked, "Are you curious about how I did it?" She nodded, then immediately shook her head. "I'm not curious, don't tell me. I can't control my mouth, and I'm afraid of being tricked by others. I don't want to know anything." I laughed, and the corners of my mouth turned up. That was a long-lost feeling of happiness. I turned on the TV, and the anchor was reporting the news. The fifth plenary session of the 18th CPC Central Committee officially announced the full liberalization of the two-child policy, fully implementing the policy that a couple can have 2 children, and actively carrying out actions to cope with the aging of the population. But the family planning policy has not been cancelled, and the full liberalization of births is only a trend in the future. This is another population policy adjustment after the third plenary session of the 18th CPC Central Committee decided to launch the implementation of the single two-child policy in 2013. So far, the one-child policy that has been implemented for 30 years has come to an end. The end.